The martial arts realm of the DC universe is one of the most underutilized areas of the entire mythos, especially in live-action adaptations. And this shouldn't be the case because the martial arts scene in the DC universe is one of the major 5 factions in my opinion. To me, these 5 factions consist of obviously the cosmic area of the DC universe, which is essentially just the Green Lantern Corps and any alien threats that's across the galaxy or universe. Then you have the pantheons of the DC universe, which would just consist of the old gods and the new gods, or any other godlike characters in the DC universe like Ramakrishna or even Neron or the Presence. Then you have the magical area of the DC universe, which would obviously also tie into the pantheons because of the nature of gods and magic in the DC universe. So this area obviously consists of characters like Zatanna, John Constantine, Deadman, Dr. Fate, Felix Faust, Madame Xanadu, Morgan Le Fay, etc., etc. Then you have your Earthbound heroes, which is essentially just heroes that are predominantly operating on Earth. So characters like Superman, The Flash, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, etc., etc. And I'm aware that these characters also tie into the other branches that I just established, but they're predominantly on Earth. That being said, right after that is the street level and or martial arts area of the DC universe. So in this video, I'm going to be explaining exactly how I'd handle that area of the DC universe because like I said, I think it's an area that's simply overlooked and not utilized enough. And hopefully James Gunn or someone comes across this video so that these ideas can get implemented into the DCU. But very quickly before we get into the video, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share if you enjoy my content, and also hit the hype button if you guys have that feature available. Diving right into the topic at hand, we first need to go over why this area of the DC universe matters and why it's important for this area to be fully fleshed out. And to put things simply, this area needs to be fleshed out because when you're dealing with a fantastical DC universe that has pretty much all of the lore and mythos intact, the smaller scale or street tier characters need to be equally as important as the higher end characters. Now to clarify, obviously I don't mean that these characters need to be equally as powerful, but what I'm saying is that these characters need to matter as much as a character like Superman or a character like Wonder Woman. And James Gunn himself has touched on this when people were asking him about why Superman is being portrayed as relative to the other characters in the movie, and he essentially said that if you want a character with a bow and arrow to matter in this universe, you need to kind of make everyone powerful to a certain extent. And obviously he means powerful in their own regard, so we wouldn't expect to see Green Arrow throwing blows with Superman, but we would expect to see Green Arrow be able to shoot Superman with an explosive arrow that can harm or affect him. And not just Superman, this would extend to all characters in the verse. And this isn't me saying that there shouldn't be any hierarchy in the DCU, because obviously if Green Arrow fights someone like the Anti-Monitor, he should just be eviscerated in an instant. But the overall idea is that you want these characters to be able to hold their own in pretty much any circumstance, because that's what makes them relevant as superheroes. So in layman's terms, what I'm saying is martial arts is more times than not a street level character's superpower, or again whatever they're extremely proficient in. For example, I know I keep using Green Arrow, but his archery is his superpower, even though it's technically not a superpower. Another popular example of this would be Batman, because Batman is a character who's essentially the perfect human being. There isn't a field that Batman isn't an expert in, which makes him a very viable superhero in the battlefield because he's extremely proficient in martial arts, he's extremely proficient in science and engineering, he's extremely proficient in detective work. And when I say extremely proficient, I want to clarify that I mean he's at a level of mastery that is essentially superhuman. And again, this is why Batman is one of the most respected heroes on the Justice League and is a part of the Trinity, which is essentially the 3 greatest superheroes on Earth. And the same insane mastery that Batman has is also passed down to all of his proteges, which is why characters like Red Hood, Nightwing, Tim Drake, Jean-Paul Valley Azrael, Cassandra Cain, Batwoman, Damian Wayne, etc. all have these ridiculous capabilities in the source material. I know I mentioned earlier that we couldn't expect to see Green Arrow throwing blows with characters like Superman, but when we look to characters like Batman, he's so proficient in the martial arts that through skill alone, he's able to bypass extreme physical disparities from characters like Supergirl and use Kryptonian martial arts to get the upper hand. We've also seen Batman employ similar tactics to take down members of the Justice League before joining, and in this narration we can see that a lot of this is due to Batman's skill. He realizes that Wonder Woman is physically superior to him, so he resorts to hitting her in a weak spot, which incapacitates her. He then utilizes his speed as well as his gadgets to blind the Flash and completely take him out of the fight, and then he just outskills Martian Manhunter, Aquaman, and Hal Jordan at the same time. And while you can argue that this is in part due to the fact that obviously the heroes are holding back, they're still trying to apprehend Batman at this point in time because this is before he joins the League. They don't know who he is, so he's just a trespasser to them. So they're definitely applying the force necessary to stop Batman Batman, Batman at this level is just better than them. So for them to get the upper hand on someone like Batman, they'd have to try a lot harder. Another example of a similar scenario playing out would be Deathstroke when he fought members of the Justice League in Identity Crisis. Deathstroke, very similar to Batman, utilizes his battle IQ and martial arts ability to get the upper hand on a lot of these characters, so much so that they even compare him to Batman. And even though Deathstroke is considered superhuman by DC and is an extremely strong character, he's still on the lower end of superhuman, because obviously someone like Superman would also be considered superhuman, but we know that he's at a completely different level. This also ties back to other DC martial artists and street tiers like Batman, Nightwing, Lady Shiva, etc., because even though those characters aren't stated to be superhuman, through their training they're able to achieve superhuman type of feats, so much so that characters who aren't really familiar with them assume that they just are superhuman. So long story short, that's why I think it matters and why it's necessary to flesh out this area in the DCU. And that begs the next question, which is, how do we go about doing that? For starters, I'm sure that we're all aware that anything street level in the DC universe pretty much stems from Batman. And that's completely fine, because Batman is just DC's premier street level character. It just is what it is. But in the DCU, you can obviously use that to your advantage the same way they have in the comics. Through Batman or other Batman related characters, you can introduce audiences to other DC martial artists. For example, in Batman Brave and the Bold, which is set to feature Damian Wayne, we could obviously get ties to the League of Assassins, which would introduce Talia al Ghul and Ra's al Ghul, two of DC's best martial artists. And in this movie, if there's flashback sequences, you can showcase not only Batman's training, but also Ra's al Ghul's training with Damian Wayne, and even Ra's al Ghul's training with Batman if they decide to go that route. So it would essentially be during this point in time in which you would lay out all of the foundation for the DCU martial arts. And that also works perfectly because the League of Assassins is essentially at the forefront of everything martial arts related in the DC universe in the source material anyway. And that's obviously because of the fact that Ra's al Ghul is immortal. He's been around for 1,000 years, so he's just bound to have a lot of ties to anything that goes on in that area. And even if we look at Ra's al Ghul himself, he's a character who has statements of being a master of innumerable killing arts and also having combat techniques that are lost to time. He's even gone so far as to master a martial art that only immortals could master, and it's actually a martial art that he picked up from Vandal Savage, who was another immortal. Now, because of the fact that Ra's al Ghul is so good with the martial arts, he by extension passes down that same martial arts knowledge to his League of Assassin Ninja, which makes them all masters of every known martial art. So I know I'm kind of rambling at this point, but you guys get what I'm saying. In Brave and the Bold alone, we could establish so much of the DCU's martial arts background, and that's before even touching other prominent DC martial artists like Lady Shiva, Richard Dragon, Bronze Tiger, David Kane, etc. And because we know that the League of Assassins Fodder Ninja, which is essentially just the ninja that you see the heroes beat up on whenever they fight the League of Assassins, are all masters of every known martial art, when we see named characters like Lady Shiva or Batman or even Nightwing fight these characters and come out basically unscathed, it tells the audience how good these characters are at martial arts and why it's effectively their superpower. Very similar to how the higher tier characters have a hierarchy, where Superman's obviously at the top of the food chain. We know this from his movie, where it's stated he's the most powerful metahuman of all time. And then we have other characters like Wonder Woman who are close. You'd also effectively be establishing a martial arts hierarchy. And obviously characters that would be at the top of that food chain would be Batman, Lady Shiva, Cassandra Cain, Nightwing, John Paul Valley Azrael, etc. And then on the lower end, you'd obviously have characters like Peacemaker, Vigilante, maybe even Green Arrow, etc. And the point of what I'm saying is that all of these characters, no matter where they rank on the hierarchy, will still be very, very good martial artists. So that way, when we see them cross over and fight other characters that are maybe higher than them on the hierarchy, again, it just further reinforces how good these characters are. And this brings me to the last thing that I think needs to be present if we're going to adapt martial arts in the DCU accurately. And the last thing is that even though the martial arts need to be taken seriously in this universe, there still needs to be a level of mystical / fantastical elements to all martial arts in the DCU. And what I mean by this is very much like how it is in the source material. There needs to be techniques and or fighting styles that these martial artists can learn that help them get upper hands and fight against overpowered or characters that are in higher tiers than them. And that's because when you look at the fundamental function of martial arts at its core, they were created to help early humans get advantages in combat against superior opponents. So for example, let's say we're in ancient times and there's a guy who's 5'7" or 5'8" and is around 180 pounds, and he runs up against a 6'2" guy who is 230 pounds in the wilderness. On paper, you look at these two in a matchup and you automatically assume that the bigger guy is going to win, especially in ancient times. However, if the smaller combatant has superior martial arts technique and skill, he has a much higher chance of coming out of that fight victorious, especially if the bigger person that he's fighting is untrained. And it's for that exact same reason that characters like Lady Shiva, even though she's significantly weaker than the likes of Supergirl, can manhandle Supergirl with her martial arts skill alone. Or even Batman, judo throwing Kingdom Come Supergirl with a Kryptonian martial art. And then you have characters like Val Armor Karate Kid from the Legion of Superheroes, who's essentially made this his entire identity. Karate Kid has consistently gone up against characters that are in the same tier as Superman or are able to harm Superman with their physical abilities, and he's just blatantly outskilled them with hand-to-hand combat. And again, the reason why he's able to accomplish these things is because it's explained to us that he's mastered every martial art from the past, present, and future. Not just from Earth, but in the entire galaxy and arguably the entire universe. And this isn't to say that the Superman tier characters that he's fighting aren't trained, because these characters are also warriors in their own regard. However, they just pale in comparison to the true martial artists of the DC universe. And the coolest thing about this is, even though Val Armor is good enough to do that well against Kryptonian tier characters, when he fights against a character like Batman in hand-to-hand, they still pretty much go high in relative, with Karate Kid himself even noting that there's things that he could learn from Batman. So imagine how good all the other martial artists that are relative to Batman should be. Characters like Nightwing, characters like Jean-Paul Valley Azrael, Lady Shiva, Cassandra Cain, etc. So for some examples of techniques and or fighting styles that I would like to see in the DCU, I'd start off with the lethal vibrating palm technique that Batman uses that he learned from Master Kirigi. This could also be introduced by showcasing Batman's training with Master Kirigi before he became Batman. And effectively what this ability allows him to do is vibrate his molecules so much that he can essentially pass his hand through the opponent's body and cause cardiac arrest. Now obviously we know that Batman doesn't kill, and because he doesn't kill, he's so good that he's able to augment this move and make it non-lethal. And this wouldn't be the only time that a martial artist in the DC universe uses ki control to effectively make themselves intangible and pass through something, because we've seen Judo Master, who's actually in the DCU and has so far been pretty fantastical with his martial arts, harness his ki so much so that he's able to intangibly pass through restraints. And after he accomplishes this feat, he literally tells us, the reader, that a true martial artist can control their body down to the molecular level, which is why he was able to pass his body through those restraints. And unfortunately, Judo Master isn't even a top 30 fighter in the DC universe. There are so many martial artists and hand-to-hand fighters that are better than him in DC. And a lot of those characters that are better than him are also masters of every aspect of martial arts, which would mean that they would also have that same understanding of ki control. So when we see a character like Batman phase through a character's chest with the vibrating palm technique, it makes sense. Another example of a technique that I'd like to see or have implemented is Lady Shiva's leopard blow, in which again she effectively hardens her fingers so much that she can drive them directly through a human skull. And again, Batman, being as good as he is able to copy this move after seeing it one time and then augment it to make it non-lethal, because obviously he doesn't kill. Another thing that I would like to see is Cassandra Cain's body reading, which is something that a lot of DC martial artists have, just on a lower scale, because of the fact that Cassandra Cain was raised with body language. So hers, as well as Lady Shiva's, is at a much higher level than the likes of someone like Batman, even though Batman doesn't rely on that to fight and he could essentially still hold his own without it. But with this body reading, characters like Cassandra Cain and Lady Shiva are so good at reading their opponent's moves that it essentially makes them have precognition or future sense. So much so that they can counter literal precogs with this fighting style. And again, other characters like Batman, Nightwing, the rest of the Bat fam, other fighters also can do this to a certain degree. Cass and Shiva are just the ones that are the most prominent with this ability. I'd also like to see characters utilize things like pressure points. And even though this isn't really a technique, I'd want to see how chi control helps these martial artists augment their physical abilities to make them appear as if they are superhumans. Now, I'm sure at this point you're probably thinking to yourself that everything that I mentioned would make the martial arts seem too outlandish and it wouldn't be able to be taken seriously, and that is where I humbly disagree. Because now this ties back into what I was saying before and how I still want it to be taken seriously, but that all starts with the approach. If you treat martial arts in the DCU like a power system like any other anime or show does their power systems, it makes it so much easier for the audience to buy into everything that's happening. And then to have people take it seriously, all you really need to do is adapt it with some sort of reverence and respect. And this is something that DC does all the time in the source material when going over martial arts fights. If you read a lot of the classic Batman comics from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, even in the current day, a lot of the martial arts fights are taken serious. You can see the characters truly invested in the fight. Even though these fantastical things are at play with pressure points, phasing abilities, characters that can fight characters that are completely out of their league, you still feel as if it's being taken serious because there's no goofy elements added to it. It's still a very serious and grounded, gritty fight. There's still stakes. Characters get injured. Characters die. The same way we can see a character like Superman fight a character like Darkseid with all of their fantastical physical abilities and powers is the same way we could see martial artists utilize their fantastical techniques and abilities to have a very serious martial arts bout. Even if we look at popular martial arts films in real life like Enter the Dragon, Ip Man, Drunken Master with Jackie Chan, Fearless with Jet Li, all of these movies have very fantastical martial arts because we all know good and well that the martial arts shit that they're performing in that movie is not achievable in real life. However, we still take it very seriously because of how the movie portrays it. In Ip Man, we see him go through 10 black belts by himself, and obviously we know that no human in real life can do that no matter how good they are at martial arts. But because of the fact that this movie portrays it in such a serious way, we buy into it and the scene is truly epic. That same reverence should be applied to DC characters, and you don't need to nerf the characters or make them grounded to make this happen. And when I say grounded there, I mean grounded in the sense that strips the character of some of their physical abilities or fantastical elements like Robert Pattinson's Batman or Christopher Nolan's Batman. We should be able to get scenes of Batman fighting his way through hundreds of assassins, hundreds of soldiers with relative ease due to his martial arts ability, and because of the fact that the scene is taken serious, we can still open our minds, suspend our disbelief, and enjoy the scene for what it is. And the same grace should be extended to other characters because Nightwing has also fought his way through 1,000 League of Assassins ninjas. We've seen Cassandra Cain fight her way through 200 League of Shadows ninjas while doing it non-lethally. We've seen Deathstroke mow through an army of 300 ninja. We've literally seen Nightwing and Jean-Paul Valley Azrael fight their way through an entire war, with Azrael having just his sword and Nightwing fighting with just his eskrima-sticks. And the Order of Saint Dumas that they were fighting at the time was armed with lasers, drones, etc. And just with their martial arts ability and battle IQ, they're able to put in work. So all in all, what I'm saying is that if this same approach is taken with DCU martial artists and the entire area of street level characters in the DCU, this area will become equally as popular or prominent as other areas of DC like the cosmic area or the pantheons or the magical area and things of that nature. So hopefully James Gunn or someone that's working at DC Studios can come across this video so that again they could try and implement the ideas that I'm putting forward. And while I'm at it, I do think that it's important to note that so far I do think that James Gunn has been doing a pretty good job with adapting the martial arts aspect of the characters that we've seen so far. For example, in Peacemaker Season 2, characters like obviously Peacemaker and Judo Master are moving like how you would expect a comic book martial artist to move. Judo Master is extremely acrobatic and agile. Peacemaker is extremely strong for what's supposed to be a regular human. All of these little things are the things that matter. And I just hope that when we get to characters like Batman, Lady Shiva, and the other prominent martial artists, that they continue to have this same approach, but also double down on it and make it even better. But overall, that's going to do it for this video, ladies and gentlemen. If you enjoyed this video, again, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and also hit that hype button. And until next time, it's been your boy K the God.